Welcome and thank you for joining us for UNICEF Canada's third Youth Activism Summit, marking National Child Day here in Canada and World Children's Day internationally. I also want to take the opportunity to recognize Transgender Day of Remembrance. My name is Sarah Chaudhry and I will be your MC for today's event. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that I am currently on the ancestral traditional territories of the Huron-Wendat, Petun, Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the New Credit. The territory is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Haudenosaunee and the Ojibwe and allied nations to peacefully share and care for the lands and resources around the Great Lakes. The traditional territory named Toronto is home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island. We are grateful to have the opportunity to live and work on their territory and commit ourselves to the work of reconciliation. I just wanted to cover a couple things before starting. We will be recording this event. French translation is available. And all participants must select English or French by clicking on the interpretation button in the menu along the button of your Zoom screen. American Sign Language interpretation is also available. The interpreter will be visible beside the speaker at all times. Closed captions are available in the Zoom meeting controls as well. For those of you who are on social media, know that you can participate in the conversation today by using the hashtag National Child Day. We're also sharing the handles for the accounts of the organizations who have come together today to host this great event in support of the young people who are leading it. We will have the chat open at different points. It's available in the Zoom meeting controls. Finally, you can switch the view in Zoom to make either the slides or speakers appear bigger or smaller, and we will only show the slides when they are relevant. I'd now like to introduce Kirsten Dumont, our knowledge keeper, who is here to open the day. Kirsten is a passionate and caring young woman and proud band member of the Algonquins of Kitigan-Zibi. She has taken part in sacred walks to protect the water, spoken on Parliament Hill about climate justice and human rights, created cultural art tutorials during the pandemic for Indigenous youth to stay connected to their cultures, and continuously raised money for the Moose Moratorium and low-income families during the pandemic. Kirsten has worked with schools, organizations, and churches such as OCDSB, CAS, the Child Welfare League of Canada, UNICEF Canada, and the Kitchissippi Church and the Woodruff Church. While she is currently completing her high school education at Urban Aboriginal, she works as a strong role model for other students who have fallen through the cracks of mainstream colonial education systems. She is an advocate, an inspiring future social worker, and a mentor to her family and community alike. We are honored to have her join us for the day. Welcome, Kirsten.
Thank you, Sarah. It's always a pleasure to work alongside all of you here at UNICEF Canada. It's a true honor to continuously be invited back here for every activism summit since 2018. Although different this year and last year, it does not take away the importance of this summit and this conference. If we were in person, I would light a smudge and offer people to bless their souls, take away the negative energy that they might feel. But unfortunately, we are unable to do that today. So I will continue on with a blessing from the Creator, as well as an opening for the day. I would like to firstly acknowledge that I am an Algonquin Anishinaabe woman who currently seats on my own territory here in Ottawa, Ontario. I'm a very privileged woman to be able to grow up in a society that is accepting of Indigenous people and Indigenous issues. Being an activist was very important to me whenever I was younger, and still now to this day, due to the fact that we need more youth voices out in the world speaking on things that affect the youth and that affect the next 7 generations that are going to come after us. Historically, activism has been portrayed and used by challenging dictatorships, protecting workers from exploitation, protecting the environment, promoting equality, opposing racism, and many other important issues. I ask you to all think about things that matter most to you. Think about the issues that affect your life, your peers' life, your family's life, the people around you. It's so important that you not only think about yourself when dealing with activism, but thinking about the bigger picture. Indigenous peoples have always thought 7 generations ahead, because in 7 generations from now, we want to ensure that the generations that will come after us are living in a world of peace, harmony, and inclusion. When we think of activism, when we think of advocacy, we think of ourselves, we think of our grandparents. We think about the effect that this is going to have on our children and our grandchildren and our grandchildren's grandchildren. It's so important that when you move forward, you're moving forward with good intentions, that you're ensuring the reason you're doing things are for the better of your people and the better of yourself. Throughout COVID, I have definitely noticed an intense increase within mental health issues. Just about a month ago, I did my very first in-person opening. I hadn't realized how nervous I was until I got on stage. I hadn't realized how nervous I would be speaking to all of you through my computer until I spoke today. These feelings of fear, these feelings of anxiety, these negative emotions do not affect who we are, and they are not determining the value that we bring to this table. These feelings that we all share make us stronger as humans and make us stronger advocates for things that we care deeply about. These feelings drive our passion, our motivation, and it builds up our confidence whenever we can go through something like this, despite our anxiety, despite our mental health issues. I speak on different aspects of life every time I'm invited here. I touch specifically on mental health today because it is so important, because mental health has not lessened, but it has increased since COVID. I have seen within my community a lack of confidence, a lack of self-esteem, people becoming isolated because they can't see their friends, their family members, their teachers, their educators. Having safe spaces, such as the one that UNICEF Canada has created for us today, is what we need more of. UNICEF Canada has created these spaces so that we can create our own, so that we can continue the path of leadership, so that we can continue the path of community and inclusivity. I've worked with UNICEF Canada for a few years now. I've also worked with some organizations that haven't led their pathways with good intentions. UNICEF Canada reminds me that there is hope within youth organizations, within organizations that help empower and motivate youth like you and I, that help remind us that our voice is valid, that our voice is valued, and our voices are heard. Today, as you listen to all the speakers, panelists, presenters, I want you to acknowledge and remember the power that they hold within their voice. And I want you to acknowledge and remember that the power that they hold within their voice, you hold within yours as well. You are the progressors of your own life. You need to decide how aggressive you want to become. Do you want to move mountains for your community? Are there things that affect you and that you question within the world that you want to change? This Activism Summit is a great place to start, learning, start obtaining techniques, start learning how you can become a better advocate and activist, how you can strengthen your own voice and your community's voice. I sit here as a reminder to all youth who struggle that it is possible. I've overcome many demons within my lifetime, and I have always come out stronger. I touch on that because sometimes we can be so capsulated within our own minds that we forget how strong we truly are. We get lost in our own headspaces, thinking about things that are so little compared to the big and enormous movements that we are creating within the world and that you can create. I sit here today reminding you all that you are incredible. You are respected. You are just as valuable as a keynote speaker that has been speaking for years. You are just as valuable as a PhD professor. You are just as valuable as the Prime Minister himself. You can move mountains if you truly put your mind to it. I want you all to remember that today and to lead with love and open arms. Leading with love, respect, open arms, trust, honesty, compassion is the only way to truly move forward within activism and advocacy. I hope you all have an incredible conference today, and I am so blessed and honored to open it and to speak to all of you and have my voice heard on this platform. Chimigwech to all of the participants today who have registered for this conference. Chimigwech to Sarah for opening it up. And Chimigwech to UNICEF and all of the other hosts, panelists, and speakers. You are all incredible. And we are not the change makers of tomorrow. We are the change makers of today. And that is so empowering. Chimigwech for having me here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Kirsten. We appreciate these wise words and will remember them as we learn together and find ways to help each other today and moving forward. So thank you. To tell us a bit more about what we're doing here today and about how we got here, I would like to now introduce David Morley, President and CEO of UNICEF Canada.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and thanks to all of you for joining us today. Bonjour, merci beaucoup de vous joindre à nous aujourd'hui. First, I'd like to acknowledge that I am, as is Sarah, joining from the ancestral traditional territories of the Huron-Wendat, Petun, Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the New Credit. And Kirsten, I would like to thank you for those really moving, inspiring words. And I think those of us who are no longer youth absolutely know that everybody here are change makers of today. There's nothing about tomorrow. It's all about today and making a better tomorrow. Tomorrow is Canada's official day to celebrate the rights of every child and youth. It's marking that date in 1989 when world leaders embraced the Convention on the Rights of the Child. This year is the 30th anniversary of its ratification here in Canada, our country's commitment to assuring every child's right to a childhood. And it's UNICEF's honor and responsibility to uphold this treaty, to promote it, to make sure that its words are more than words, that they lead to actions for the children and the youth of the world. And it's our job at UNICEF to remind countries of the promise they made not only on World Children's Day, but every day of the year. You know, it's more than 30 years now, and I don't know that the writers of the convention could have foreseen the world that you are growing up in today. The global pandemic, schools shut down or disrupted, access to health and mental health services restricted, the climate emergency, and even a failure to ensure the basics like food and clean water for all, especially for Indigenous youth, racialized young people with disabilities, and those who are furthest from opportunity and power. And amidst all these challenges, I'm still hopeful for a brighter future. And that's because young people, all of you, are leading the way. And today, youth advocates from across our country are sharing their experiences and perspectives and how we can help secure their enduring rights. The young people we'll be hearing from today have been working with us for almost 8 months in UNICEF Canada's youth advocacy program. We're really proud of the work they've done together, and we're committed to helping them with the even tougher work ahead. So I call on my fellow adult allies to listen and to join UNICEF Canada and our partner organizations in committing to their vision for the future. It's easy to choose the world we know over a world we cannot yet imagine, but youth are helping us see and believe in the possibilities for a better world. I want to thank all those young people here today, the adults that support them, and our partners. And I also want to thank the Honorable Marcy Ian, Minister for Women and Gender Equality and Youth, for joining us today. The Honorable Marcy Ian has served as Member of Parliament for Toronto Centre since October 2020. Minister Ian is a devoted community leader and a passionate advocate for vulnerable communities in Canada and around the world. Before being elected to the House of Commons, she had an award-winning career in journalism and television that spanned 3 decades. She's traveled internationally, and she's worked as a mentor with underprivileged youth with Trust 15, an after-school program based in the Etobicoke area of Toronto and in La Loche, Saskatchewan, following the shooting at Dene High School in 2016. Minister Ian has also supported students from these communities by co-founding a new scholarship at the RTA School of Media at Ryerson University, which will be soon renamed. As a graduate of that university, she later returned to the university as a distinguished visiting professor and served on its board of governors. Minister Ian was born and raised in Toronto, where she lives with her children, Blaze and Dash. Minister, I know these young people have a committed partner in you. So I'd like to welcome you and have everybody welcome Minister Marcy Ian to share a few words. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. It's an honor to be with you. It's so good to see you, albeit virtually. Hello, bonjour. I would like to start by acknowledging that I am joining you from my home in Toronto on the traditional territory of the Wendat, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Métis, and Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. Again, David, thank you for the generous and lovely introduction. And Kirsten, I have to speak directly to you. You are courageous, my friend. Thank you so much for sharing your truth and for leading with empathy. You are absolutely incredible. Chi miigwech. Je suis amplement fière d'être avec vous toutes et c'est passionnant de voir le travail qui l'UNICEF fait pour soutenir les enfants ici au Canada et dans le monde. We are also joined by incredible teams at YMCA Canada, BGC Canada, Equitas, the International Institute for Research on Children, the Student Commission of Canada, and so many young leaders, incredible young leaders. I'd like to thank everyone here today for their passion as well as their commitment to ensuring that the rights of Canadian children, in fact, the rights of kids everywhere, are respected and taken into consideration. As Minister for Women and Gender Equality and Youth, I am dedicated to listening to our youth. You're right, you're not just the leaders of tomorrow, you're the leaders of today. So considering their intersectional and diverse perspectives, learning from their experiences and insights, and of course that includes amplifying their voices. Je ne peux pas le faire toute seule. Alors, sachez-vous, je vous contacterai dans les semaines et les mois à venir. I look forward to hearing from you. Please reach out in the weeks and months ahead. I have to tell you that this work is very, very personal for me. As a mom of two incredible kids, David mentioned off the top, Blaze and Dash, I want the world that they grow up in to be progressive and full of opportunities for them to shine, to speak their truths. Living through the pandemic has been eye-opening for me as it has for all of you. We've missed out on graduations, job opportunities, and just chances to connect with friends and family. It has been extremely tough. And I know that I recognize the many sacrifices young Canadians have made to keep those most vulnerable among us safe and secure. But for us to emerge from this pandemic, we must actively listen to the needs of young people. Kirsten talked about it. Mental health is more of an issue now than it was pre-pandemic. Because at the end of the day, the decisions being made today will impact not only youth today, but youth well into the future. We know that Article 12 of the United Nations Convention of the Rights of the Child states that children have the human right to have opinions and that these opinions be heard and taken seriously. It's really that heard and taken seriously part that is exactly where our government knew we needed to step up and we needed to make real change. So as legislators, it's our job, it's my job to create new ways that children and youth can communicate directly to us, directly with us, while also reducing those institutional barriers that prevent racialized kids and youth from participating fully in society. And that's exactly what we've done since coming into office in 2015. You might know that our first ever Minister of Youth was the Prime Minister himself, which was followed by the creation of the Prime Minister's Youth Council and the official Youth Secretariat within government. These are all avenues that children and youth have used to tell ministers and the Prime Minister himself exactly what is on their mind, and it has helped to shape our decision-making as a government by giving youth voices, rather, a seat at the table. The Prime Minister's Youth Council, with the support of the Youth Secretariat, bring together a really diverse group of young people from across the country to discuss the issues that are important to them and to their peers. I met a couple of them in Halifax just a couple of weeks ago, and they are outspoken and they are standing up. And they are standing up not just for themselves, but for youth right across this country. Notre travail est d'écouter. Et bien souvent, ce que nous entendons dans ces réunions fait l'objet d'un suivi au niveau ministériel. The goal of these discussions is not necessarily to reach a consensus, because that won't always happen, but rather to explore important issues from a variety of perspectives so that we can be sure that a range of young voices is heard. Another example of this important work is our government creating Canada's first ever youth policy. More than 5,000 young Canadians took part in the national conversation that led to that policy's development. In addition to the policy, just this past summer, Canada's first ever State of the Youth report was released after a quite extensive period of consultation. This report, I want to tell you, was written by youth, for youth, and challenges governments at every level to take action on a variety of key themes. I want to say that again. It was written by youth because that's important for young people. In fact, today's themes of mental health, climate change, racial justice, and disability and accessibility are a huge part of the State of Youth report. Rest assured that the release of that report won't be the end of our engagement with Canada's young people. Our commitment is to ensure an ongoing dialogue. That's what this is, that will be led by the Prime Minister's Youth Council and supported by me, as well as the Youth Secretariat. And even further, this work will inform the important decisions that our government will need to make as we walk the road from pandemic to recovery. Les jeunes Canadiens ont des idées novatrices et des perspectives uniques sur la façon dont le gouvernement devait relever les défis auxquels nous sommes confrontés aujourd'hui et auxquels nous serons confrontés à l'avenir. My commitment, our government's commitment to you, is to keep the conversation with Canada's youth going, to keep listening, to keep empowering you, to keep amplifying your voices as we build a more progressive and inclusive Canada for everyone. Thank you so much. It is my privilege to be here. Merci beaucoup à tous.
Thank you, Minister Ian, for those inspiring words to open this event. We're honored to have you here with us today. So, what are we doing here today? Well, the Youth Activism Summit is the largest youth-led National Child Day event in Canada, and it's one of many events UNICEF is holding around the world for World Children's Day. Today's event represents the work of UNICEF Canada's Youth Advocacy Program participants who came together throughout 2021 to learn and share knowledge and skills about their human rights and how to advocate for them. These young people identified 4 interconnected issues that unite them in their passion to shape a better country and a reimagined world: climate change, disability and accessibility, mental health and racial justice, and Indigenous rights. These young people convened youth-led discussions on these issues, engaging over 100 young people from across Canada. And what was the result? Well, this year's Reimagine playbook, a summary of the 4 discussion topics, complete with recommendations for how decision makers, other youth, and adult allies, yes, you, can take action. There is something every single one of us can do to take the playbook and support young people to take back their futures. It is available on the UNICEF Canada website, and the link is being shared in the chat box right now. We're honored to be joined by many of the young people who participated in the Youth Advocacy Program, led the youth advocacy sessions, and contributed to the Reimagine playbook. Prior to each presentation, we'll also see results from YouReport Canada on each topic area to hear from other young people from across the country. YouReport Canada is a free, confidential, digital polling platform and open to anyone ages 13 to 24. It's a great way for youth in every province and territory to have their voices heard by answering polls on issues that matter to you. If you want to become a YouReporter, visit youreportcanada.ca. All right, so we asked YouReporters about our first topic, climate change. One young person said, "I think about climate change every day. It makes me worry about my future." Eco-anxiety is a common experience for young people. We also asked young people about responding to the climate crisis, and more than 8 in 10 young people agreed that all federal parties should be working together to address the issue. Now let's get started by hearing from the group on climate change on how we can address this issue together.
Hi everyone, I'm Katie Yu. I use she, her pronouns, and I live in Iqaluit, Nunavut on Inuit Nunangat, and I'm part of the climate change group in UNICEF Canada's youth advocacy program. So as part of our advocacy, we've collected youth experiences, opinions, and recommendations on climate change through our surveys and sessions. So youth have told us that they're experiencing warmer and irregular weather, more precipitation, melting sea ice, more droughts and floods, and more pollution from climate change. We're feeling that the sense of urgency still seems low and we face apathy on the climate crisis. As one youth participant shared, climate change has put a huge weight on my shoulders because leaders aren't taking enough action. Climate change is also causing and worsening other social issues such as internal displacement, food insecurity, and illnesses. Eco-anxiety or worry about our planet's future is also affecting our mental health. As young people, we are both the least responsible and among the most impacted by climate change. Now, we've also collected some quotes from youth across the country on how they're experiencing climate change in their area of the country. So as I live in Nunavut, we've had a really wet and warm year, and it has never rained more frequently or for as many months. We've had milder winters and there's less sea ice on the ocean. The permafrost is also thawing, which affects our infrastructure. The weather has been unpredictable and it snowed multiple times this fall, but it kept melting until early November. So our second group presenter, Ella, is from Yukon, and here's what she sent in. So I live in Whitehorse, and we usually have very little precipitation and cool winters, but it's been much warmer and wetter in recent years. Last year, we had more than double our usual snowfall, but this summer we've had more forest fires, and we've had smoke blow in from BC, Alberta, and even across the ocean from Siberia. Now we're going down to the West Coast. Here's what a young person from British Columbia told us. So I live in British Columbia, and the massive flooding has basically isolated the lower mainland from the rest of the province. In the Okanagan, our store shelves are empty because all our goods come from Vancouver. The main highway is washed out and won't be rebuilt for months. During the summer, we were all hoping for rain because of the massive fires, but then Vancouver got a month's worth of rain in 2 days. Now, here's what a young person from Alberta told us. So I live in Alberta, and we have experienced forest fires in Fort McMurray, floods and extreme hail in Calgary, and now we're experiencing less snow in cities and more snow in rural areas. We've also experienced the devastation from our neighbors in BC. The forest fires affected our air quality, and now severe floods are cutting off our supply routes and separating families. Now, here's what another member of our climate change group in Ontario told us. So I live in Southern Ontario, and we've noticed a shift in average temperatures in the past few years. Because of our closeness to the Great Lakes, we usually have moderate weather, so cooler summers and warmer winters. But due to climate change, our climate has become a bit more extreme on both ends of the spectrum. We've noticed more and more hail and less powdered snow, and summers are drier than they were before. It's especially noticeable in Mississauga, where it rarely snows until early December. Now we're going to go to the East Coast. Here's what a young person in Nova Scotia told us. So I live in Nova Scotia, and as a coastal province, our lives are deeply impacted by the ocean. Our waters are heating up and the water levels are rising. As a result, hurricanes are much more common and powerful. Now I'll pass it on to Ella from our group to share some more experiences and our key recommendations.
Hi, I'm Ella Bradford. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm joining from Whitehorse, Yukon on the traditional territories of the Kwanlundan First Nations and the Tonquichan Council. I'm also a member of the climate change group, and youth have told us that climate change has been significantly impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. We saw that there was much less concrete action and mobilization during the pandemic, but we saw that leaders could take action quickly and effectively on global issues. Why is the same not being done for climate change? Youth have noticed that there was increased waste from PPE, such as disposable masks, and higher and more individual packaging on items. How can we find a balance between being sanitary and safe and environmentally conscious? There was less individual travel with people working from home and little international travel. However, there was more corporate pollution from shipping and delivering goods. Despite less travel, emissions were only reduced by 12%, so the pandemic has reinforced that we need to think beyond individual responsibility. Now I'm going to share some of our key recommendations for youth, adults, and decision makers, and you can read all of them in detail in the Reimagine playbook. So for youth, take individual actions. Use public transit as much as possible, shop responsibly, educate yourself and others, reduce consumption and waste, and remember to take care of yourself. Also, partake in community advocacy like school groups and projects, walkouts, work with environmental organizations, and partake in strikes and petitions. Use your voice. For adult allies, we also recommend taking individual actions like transit, being responsible with your waste, and shopping responsibly. You can also work with, volunteer at, or support environmental organizations in their work. And most importantly, take climate change seriously. Listen to youth, support us, accept our activism, and vote with the climate in mind. And lastly, be positive role models for climate action and awareness. You have a bigger influence than you realize, so please use it. And for decision makers, we need you to listen to youth, to science, and to Indigenous people who all have ideas and ways to solve the climate crisis. We need to be taken seriously. We also need to ban harmful practices such as fracking, pipelines, oil dumping, and instead invest in sustainable solutions like clean energy. We have many renewable resources and solutions. Why are they not being used? We need to conserve and restore ecologically important areas such as forests and wetlands, which store vast amounts of carbon and are of vast importance to our ecosystems. Corporations must be held accountable for pollution, mass production, and waste. Governments can also collaborate with environmental organizations so that they can both achieve their goals and protect the environment. Finally, we need you to prioritize the well-being of people and the planet over our profit. Thank you for your time, and you can see all of our recommendations in the Reimagine playbook.
Thank you, Katie and Ella. Now we're going to hear from young people on disability and accessibility. More than half of you reporters say they or someone they know has faced barriers to participation because of a disability or a lack of accessibility. When asked for their advice to help improve things for youth with disabilities, this you reporter said, treat disabilities as a common part of the human experience rather than a rare exception to normalcy. Now to hear how we can improve this area, I'd like to introduce the Disability and Accessibility Group.
Hi, hello everyone. I hope everyone is doing well. I'm Alita. I use she or her pronouns, and I'm currently speaking live from the traditional unceded Algonquin territory, also known as Ottawa. Today, Kate and I are honored to be presenting our important topic of disability and accessibility issues in Canada. So let's start with some numbers to visualize. According to the World Bank, 1 billion people, or 15% of the world's population, experience some form of disability, with a higher prevalence in developing countries. In Canada, disability prevalence is 13%, more than 540,000 people for youth aged 15 to 24. The province that has the highest percentage of disabled residents is in Nova Scotia. With widespread school closures during the pandemic, it is reported that children with disabilities were deprived of basic services such as meals, assistive technology, access to resources, and other services lacking were recreation programs, extracurricular activities, and water, sanitation, and hygiene programs. With COVID-19, parents or caretakers are now acting as their children's teachers, as well as experiencing an increase in the divide between youth's access to equipment, electricity, and the internet. Based on stats compiled by the Government of Canada, nearly half of Canadians with disabilities, difficulties, or long-term conditions experienced technology-related barriers. The second most commonly reported barrier was online access to federal government information, services, or support, such as, say, applying for employment insurance or disability benefits, completing a passport application, or even filing tax forms. In addition, almost 2/3 of those with disabilities report communication barriers. So the proportion who experienced a communication barrier varied by the type of situation. So for example, about 2 in 5 Canadians with disabilities reported a barrier in communicating by phone, in person, and in reading and understanding written materials. About 1/4 reported communication barriers while using video conferencing, such as Zoom right now, or social media, or even online chat forums. All of these statistics are not just numbers to document. These stats remind us that young people who have a disability or disabilities should not be infantilized, mocked, and bullied because they require different accessibility needs to live their lives. In our session, youth express the barriers they face or difficulties that their loved ones experience, such as bullying, fears, or stigmas surrounding disabilities, lack of engagement from peers or environment, and physical barriers. For example, say inconvenient ramp locations for wheelchair users. Many youth also lamented how accessing support systems or needs can be time-consuming, complicated, and oftentimes expensive. Other accessibility issues that tremendously impacted young people's lives included delays and disorganization in medical diagnosis and resources, especially with virtual support due to the pandemic, lack of comprehensive health insurance or benefits, lack of peer support, and accessible programs and services. While this was the reality that youth faced every day, even before the pandemic, these issues are much more prominent now. Inaccessible virtual systems have been put in place, such as virtual medical checkups, medical records, and so on. Many people with disabilities have also remarked how in-person services are increasingly becoming harder to access, such as education, transportation considerations, and more. Even with getting the COVID-19 vaccine, some people with disabilities have found it difficult to sign up for appointments online. Imagine that. The pandemic has truly affected everyone's mental health, and for those with disabilities and accessibility needs, their overall well-being is compromised as the pandemic continues. As one youth shared with us, "My dad uses a wheelchair to get around, and not much has changed where he is in the last 10 to 20 years." This statement illustrates the need for advancing disability and accessibility rights in Canada, particularly in light of the inaccessible systems exposed in this pandemic. Now on to Kate.
Thanks, Alita. My name is Kate. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm in Calgary, Alberta, the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta, and Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. So our advocacy group held a session that Alita referred to connect with other youth across Canada with support from One Youth, UNICEF Canada. So from this session, we created the following recommendations for young people, adults, and decision makers. Youth should stop bullying others and eliminate stigma and stereotypes. They should stop the fear around disabled youth and disabilities. They should ask disabled youth and youth with disabilities their preferences on language and support and advocate for each other. In 2021, no young person in Canada should be discriminated against and bullied by their peers. For adults, they need to know that they cannot understand disabled children's experiences and needs. They must treat disabled youth with respect. Youth are in the best positions to know what they need and how to best reach them. Adults should not be afraid of saying disabled or any related terms. They must use appropriate language and not use ableist words to make those with no disabilities feel better, such as special needs. Adults need to educate themselves and those around them about disabilities, including learning from people with disabilities. And lastly, adults must be responsible for creating inclusive spaces and dialogues for disability and accessibility. Now, decision makers are in the best position to create political and systemic changes. Decision makers must be held accountable and follow through on the needs of youth with disabilities. They must create inclusive educational settings by having mandatory sign language in provincial education curriculums and have more accessible opportunities, including through virtual learning. They must create more testing and diagnosis opportunities for youth in schools. Decision makers must be accountable with current policies for inclusive built environments. They must be proactive instead of reactive by making mandatory policies for all public and private places to be accessible. They must understand that accommodations and supports benefit everyone. Hiring employers should not discriminate against youth with disabilities who are highly qualified and need accommodations. And lastly, decision makers must not focus solely on numerical data to create policies. They need to listen to youth with disabilities, their allies, and everyone with lived experiences to make change. If even one young person is asking for help, they must provide the support they need. So based on all these responses and the work of our advocacy group compiled over the year, we, alongside our mentors in UNICEF Canada, created the following change statement. Youth with disabilities have vastly different experiences and receive various levels of support across provinces and territories. A new federal youth disability advocate would help ensure standardization and accountability, as well as improve the services offered for disabled youth. This new role would promote and protect the rights of young people with disabilities in a similar way to how the new federal housing advocate supports the right to housing. Thank you for listening to our group.
Thank you to Elita and Kate. It is no surprise to many that the pandemic negatively impacted a lot of young people's mental health. But according to you reporters, misunderstanding and stigma around mental health still exists. One young person said, regardless of whether you think a young person is just being dramatic or in a phase, it's better to believe and support them than to lose them and wish you had taken them seriously. When it comes to services to address mental health challenges, almost 9 in 10 you reporters said support should be considered a basic need. To learn more about young people's mental health, let's hear from the mental health group.
Hello, my name is Michaela and I'm part of the mental health group. My pronouns are she, her, and today I'm joined with Amy and Sophia. Amy will start us off with some statistics to help illustrate the state of mental health in youth in Canada today.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Amy. My pronouns are she, they. Last Tuesday, November 16th, youth in Iqaluit were marching to protest the government's lack of action on suicide prevention in Nunavut. Since 1999, 27% of deaths in Nunavut have been suicides, to which almost every family has lost someone they loved, and it occurs in an exceedingly higher ratio for young people. This is one of the highest suicide rates in the entire world, an ongoing suicide epidemic sustained by a country known for its universal health care. What about the rest of the young people in Canada? According to the Mental Health Commission of Canada, 75% of youth do not have sufficient access to the mental health services they need. For complex conditions like major depressive disorders with substance abuse, medications are overprescribed, whereas psychological treatments are usually absent. And frankly, the majority of us cannot afford adequate treatments from psychologists and therapists, who are mostly found in private practices. We must constantly pay the high fees out of our own pockets, and this only serves to sabotage the well-being of the already underprivileged. Unlike the UK, Australia, and many other countries, surprisingly little mental health services are covered under our public health care. And as a matter of fact, our country spends the least on mental health, out of its overall national medical spending, compared to all other G7 countries. Mental health is no novel subject. All of us have either struggled with it or are familiar with someone who did. 1 in 5 Canadians have been afflicted by the pains of mental health problems. During the pandemic, the mental health of youth deteriorated the most compared to every other age group. Unfortunately, we keep mistaking it for something of a lower priority compared to physical health, something intangible or even contrived. Ultimately, it's us youth who are paying for the price of these misconceptions. Therefore, we're advocating for 2 equally important actions, one concerning education and workplace training, and the other one targeting the public healthcare system. Let me pass the education part to Michaela.
To help improve these problems that Amy's been talking about, we aim to tackle the obstacles to accessibility to care and education. If we had increased awareness in schools and other facilities, mental health could be more openly talked about and understood, which in turn would alleviate the stigma. In our session statement, we discussed it was important to emphasize both proactive and reactive approaches with the goal of making the most direct, positive impact on youth. In terms of the proactive approach, knowledge is key, and access to mental health education and resources needs to be prioritized, especially at the governmental level. By implementing specific criteria in schools, outlining mental health guidelines for educators, mental health could be better understood and normalized at a younger age. It would improve the quality of mental health education and could serve as early intervention. Better education in classrooms would also encourage more mental health literacy among parents. In turn, this would provide spaces at home for children to talk openly about mental health issues. Educating young people about the spectrum of mental health issues would help remove the fears surrounding diagnosis and treatment. It would help illustrate what a healthy mental environment might resemble and provide young people with the confidence to know when and how to ask for help. Young people today will be our future adults. Investing in their education will help remove the stigma and build a more mentally healthy, conscious society. In addition to better education surrounding mental health, we also feel it is important to implement specific training. I'll hand it off to Sophia to talk about the training.
Hi everyone, my name is Sophia and I use she, her pronouns. In Canada, there is legislation that requires physical first aid to be available in workplaces to at least some extent, while no such legislation exists for mental health first aid. The latter is only recommended. Why is mental health, which is a leading cause of disability, considered inferior to physical health? Why does the ability of workplaces, especially those that work with youth, to respond to mental health crises depend on their own initiative? There should be an implementation of mandatory basic training on mental health for educators and other professionals that interact with youth regularly. Young ones are the most susceptible to developing poor mental health. It makes sense that those who work with them closely should know the fundamentals of how mental health works and how it should be approached. The knowledge this training would provide could be used as a tool to support the mental wellness of youth. Preventative measures are crucial to tackling issues surrounding mental health. Interventions like these can potentially stop the problem in some cases or keep it from becoming severe. What about those for whom preventative measures are not enough? People who need urgent help often wait for months on end until getting a meeting, let alone consistent treatment. Why doesn't mental health hold equal status with physical health in the healthcare system? I'll hand it over to Amy now.
Every youth, despite their economical conditions and ethnicities, has the right to basic healthcare, including mental health. Therefore, we also advocate and call on all of you to push for an expansion of our healthcare system to include more mental health services for youth. This means more funding for evidence-based therapies such as cognitive behavioral therapy and mindfulness meditation. We need to train more youth mental health practitioners and incorporate them into our public system. Did you know that when in crisis, youth who cannot wait 1 year for an appointment with a public psychologist sometimes have to cycle through the emergency room over and over again without getting consistent treatment? Such an inefficient use of resources that can be otherwise totally prevented. Additionally, we need more culturally informed practitioners, culturally integrated therapy modules to support our diverse communities, to alleviate the suicide epidemic in Nunavut. We don't mean to reduce this problem to a purely medical one, but it's only a necessary first step. Time is short and we have a lot more to say about youth mental health in Canada. Please refer to our session statement in the Reimagine playbook for more facts, thoughts, and proposals.
We would like to thank you for listening to us. And as Amy said, there is stuff in the Reimagine playbook for all youth, adult allies, and decision makers. Please take care of yourselves, everyone.
Thank you to the mental health group. We really appreciate it. For our last topic area, we asked you reporters if systemic racism is a problem in Canada. More than 8 in 10 said it's at least somewhat of a problem, and over half report experiencing or witnessing racism. On Indigenous rights, 3/4 of you reporters said they have a role to play in reconciliation, but only 37% have had the opportunity to be involved in activities advancing reconciliation. One young person said that they need more knowledge gaining opportunities to network and learn more of the culture and background of our fellow Indigenous people, more equalizing opportunities and ways to advance and grow those. And this person recommended that we incorporate Indigenous culture and background into school history curricula. Now for more on this, we'll hear from the Racial Justice and Indigenous Rights Group.
Hello, and thank you all for coming. My name is Anika, and I use he, she, or they pronouns. I'm on the traditional land of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples, and I will be speaking on behalf of the Racial Justice and Indigenous Rights Group. Firstly, we will discuss what we know. As you can see in the playbook, hate crimes related to race and ethnicity have always been a big issue, but since COVID-19, the amount has skyrocketed, especially anti-Asian hate crimes. Hate crimes aren't the only thing BIPOC youth are facing, especially in relation to COVID. Data from Toronto and Ottawa indicate that COVID-19 cases are 1.5 to 5 times higher among BIPOC populations because of lack of proper access to healthcare. The Statistics Canada Labour Force survey show that the drastic increases in unemployment have hit BIPOC communities very hard. And employed people, Black Indigenous people of color, the Canadians, earn an average of only 81 cents to the dollar compared to other Canadians. These are only a few of the examples. These issues have been here before COVID and were always a problem, but were magnified by the pandemic to a large degree. COVID is just another very large straw of systemic racism that is threatening to break the camel's back. This is why it is important to address this now and later, because harm is being done right now to Black, Indigenous people of color youths, and we have to do something right now to stop that. For Indigenous rights, Canada is doing a decidedly bad job. Indigenous women and girls are being killed, and their cases are not getting any attention that they should, especially compared to non-Indigenous people. There are also post-secondary programs that are only offered in urban areas far away from reserves. On the topic of reserves, they lack many utilities. 50% of communities in Ontario are on boil water advisories, despite the government pledging to end them all by 2021. It is almost 2022. We have to get on that. Youth in Canada and all around the world are experiencing all of these problems, from racial profiling, which has a large amount of negative health effects, to inequities in health system, attempts to assimilate into them into dominant culture, and microaggressions that they face every day. As you're aware, each of our groups held sessions that gathered people to share their opinion about the issue at hand. We listened to firsthand experiences of youth discussing problems regarding racial injustice and Indigenous rights and got their recommendations on what to do. We learned that we have to work small and large. Every single one of you can make a difference, even if it is just reading a new book. There are so many amazing authors, such as Roshani Chokshi, who wrote the Arusha series, which I can personally say is an amazing book series that is good because I was excited since I saw my culture reflected in a book. When youth see themselves represented, they are able to see themselves as the hero of the story and know that they are capable of doing stuff. Representation is very important and can make a dramatic difference, especially for people whose representation because of the systemic racism and misrepresentation in news and social media may be negative. Then there are also books that you can use to educate yourself, such as the book Stamped by Ibram X. Kendi and Jason Reynolds, that I recommend to everyone so they can educate themselves. On a larger scale, we have to start revising laws and policies that are unfair to Black, Indigenous people of color and integrate the concept of anti-racism into the school curriculum in order to teach kids how to spot microaggressions and stop the cycle of racism from the roots. Whether that is bringing in books like Stamped, which is edited specifically for a younger audience, or including lessons about microaggressions and why the use of any type of derogatory language is unacceptable. A major ongoing process of achieving reconciliation are the 94 calls to action that were implemented in June of 2015. There are realistic goals set out to begin to reconcile for the past atrocities Canada has involved in history and to this day. Guess how many of the 94 calls to action have been fulfilled in the last 6 years? Only 14. That is not good at all. We should have completed many more, such as call to action number 16, which examines the role of post-secondary institutions and makes sure they are creating programs in Indigenous people's languages. We need to expedite this process so more of these amazing solutions can be implemented. For youth specifically, here are some things you can do to make a positive If you hear a microaggression targeted at someone, call it out. There is no place for such harmful comments. Small things make a huge difference, and that can be positive or negative. For decision makers, the most important thing is for you to hold yourself accountable when you take these actions. As we were talking to other youths, they mentioned the Prime Minister of Barbados, Morley, highlighted at the COP26, and how they wanted to have ambition with action. We need increased representation, especially in worlds with a lot of power. We need leaders to challenge their biases, make more equitable education, such as in the Call of Action number 16. And really importantly, we have to change policies in teaching and authority jobs, like policing, to be more aware of racial injustice and to make specific training mandatory to combat unconscious biases. And we also need to ensure diversity in jobs such as teaching, healthcare, etc., to address inequities in those fields. We know what to do. We've heard it so many times. We have 80 remaining calls of action we can work on, resources, people to talk to. We have everything we need. Now we all have to just work together so that we can accomplish the things needed to solve these problems. We could sit here all day listing all steps we should be taking, but nothing will change unless we take action right now, including people of all positions. Whether you're a youth, you can take action by joining advocacy clubs in your community and by standing up and protesting when the need arises, or from people of really high positions who can work to change policies. Our ideas are not new ones. They have been repeated over the course of history by youth all around the world. We will continue to share and shout our message to the world because it matters. People are being harmed right now. We, as youth, are ready to step into this arena regarding the deadly flaws in the systems and stop these injustices. Now, are you all ready to step into the arena with us? Thank you.
Thank you to Anika and all our presenters. We encourage young people who were inspired by those presentations, like I was, to stay tuned for an important announcement about next year's youth advocacy program at the end of today's session. All right, so now we're going to hear from our intergenerational panel, an influential group of adult allies who are leaders on the issues raised by youth advocates today. Firstly, I'd like to introduce Megan Leslie, the President and CEO of the World Wildlife Fund Canada.
Hey, I'm really excited to be here. Those were fantastic presentations.
Yes, I agree. Nice to have you, Megan. Next, I'd like to welcome Minu Sekund, founder and CEO of Accessibility for All and the executive lead of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion at Holland Bloorview Kids Rehabilitation Hospital. Hi.
Hi, thank you, Sarah, for introducing, and I'm very, very impressed with today's presentations and looking forward to participating.
It's great to have you here with us. Also with us is Mark Beckles, who is the Vice President of Social Impact and Innovation at RBC. Hi.
Hi, Sarah. Good afternoon, everyone, and looking forward to today's conversation. So impressed with what I've heard so far and looking forward to the conversation. Thank you.
All right. Finally, we're joined by Adet Mccarthy, the Executive Director of Equitas.
Hello. So I joined my fellow panelists in saying how impressed I was with all of the presentations, how challenged I was, and how I heard the call for action, and really excited to continue the discussion with all of you. So thank you.
Thank you all so much for joining us today to discuss these important issues and how we can reimagine the future together. So I'd like to begin by giving each panelist a chance to speak to the youth presentations we all just watched. What jumped out for you? How does it relate to the work that you do? Adet, let's start with you.
Thank you. I'm going to first start off by acknowledging that I'm actually calling in from unceded Indigenous lands. I'm in Montreal, Tchatchaki, which is historically known as a gathering place for many First Nations. And the Kahnawake Nation has been really recognized as the custodians of the lands. And today it is a home of a very diverse group of people living here on the island. So it speaks to me because I think that that's also what we're talking about today, which is really bringing together a diversity of opinions. Anika, I'm going to speak very in particular to your challenge to decision makers and to adult allies to take action. And I was reflecting on the written reports and the words that you spoke to, and it made me really think about the importance of ensuring that as we do ensure that there's place for voice, that we ensure that there's the voices are heard, that we also steer away from tokenism, that we also steer away from representation, from sort of accepting that there's diversity of opinion, and we actually move towards true inclusiveness and true sort of taking into consideration what the voices are expressing. And it's challenging. And I would say that at Equitas, we're a human rights education organization. So we educate, we provide opportunities for people to build knowledge and skills. We empower, so inspire people, so young people to claim their rights and hold decision makers accountable. And we hope that that's going to change, that's going to make change to strengthen people's ability to take leadership. That's what we do. It's all about transformational educational processes. And so when I was listening to you, I was thinking about the power of education, about learning. And in a lot of what you were saying was sort of a continual request for decision makers and for adult allies to consistently be ready to be challenged. And challenging means really unlearning, putting aside what we have learned, and accepting to learn new ways of leading with others and working with others. And so there's always like a little moment of discomfort sometimes when I feel challenged. And I think that that's good. I think that's good because it actually then spurs reflection later on. And so your words really reminded me of the importance of really accepting challenge. And that's really connected to the work that we do at Equitas when we're working with and alongside communities and marginalized groups, and in particular with young groups.
Thank you, Adet. I love what you said about, growth in discomfort. I think that's a really important point. Megan, what stood out to you in the presentation from the climate change group?
A lot of things stood out, I'll be honest. When Ella kicked off the recommendations and said something along the lines of, hey, we have this example of our government mobilizing on COVID and the pandemic. Why can't they just do something similar on climate? It's like you can read my mind or like interpret channeling my dreams or something, because that COVID press conference, remember in the first days of the pandemic, there was a COVID press conference every day. Imagine if that press conference was about climate change every day. And we heard about where the numbers were at with our emissions, what we were working on, what was going to be happening. I mean, wouldn't everything change if we had that much attention paid to the climate crisis? So in the recommendations, I really appreciated, Katie said, we're the generation that is going to have the impacts of climate change, but we weren't responsible for it. And yet their recommendations had individual actions. I appreciated that. The climate crisis isn't going to be solved with individual actions, but it's important for us as individuals to think about how we can have a smaller footprint. I really appreciated as well that they said, hey, but it's a collective thing that we have to do here. We have to work together. And that means business, it means organizations, it means government. And so Sometimes people ask me, what's the one thing I can do? If there is one thing that everybody listening today can do, it's find an organization you trust. Maybe it's WWF, maybe it's not. Maybe it's Greenpeace or Environmental Defense, or maybe it's a local group in your community, and sign up to get their emails or to get their Instagram feed or whatever it is. Sign up. And you think, well, why? You know, like, do I really need another email? Maybe not. You can hit delete if you need to. But number one, that organization gets to say, hey, government, or hey, business, we're telling you, you got to do this thing. And look, there's like 100,000, 200,000, 300,000 Canadians behind us. They're like our members. We're actually 300,000 people. And that's incredibly powerful. So that's the first benefit. The second benefit is maybe you hit delete, maybe you scroll past, maybe every once in a while you see something and you're like, oh, there's something happening in my community and I could be a part of that. So then all of a sudden that individual is taken to a collective in a different way. And it matters. Think about those climate marches in 2019. Tens of thousands of people around the world coming out to demonstrate on climate. It happened during the Canadian federal election. And it was organized by youth, and it had an impact on the election. The then Prime Minister was trying to get his photo op with Greta Thunberg, and all of a sudden, most of the parties had climate platforms, and one party didn't. And they said after the election, that was our mistake. You know, clearly this is something Canadians want. And when they said Canadians, they meant youth, because it's youth that organized it. What an incredible thing. You know, this small act of signing up to get something in your feed or to get an email, translating into this collective power and collective action. So that's my one hot tip for everyone. That small act, individual act that can ladder up to the collective. It matters and it has an impact.
Thank you, Megan. Mark, as someone who works in social innovation, I know you hear lots of ideas of how businesses and governments can do things better. What stood out to you in these presentations?
Well, thank you, Sarah, for the question. I just want to start by saying that the territory that I'm speaking to you from was the subject of the Treaty 19 purchase, known as the Adjutant's purchase. It is Treaty 19, which is Peel region, and I am just so privileged to live and work on this land, and certainly to honor the rights and privileges of Indigenous peoples who occupied this land first and continue to do so. To your question, yes, I do hear lots of these conversations, and to Megan's point earlier, it is for us a point of privilege now to be able to, you know, listen to the voices of young people and allow our work to be informed by young people. We are living, I think, in unprecedented times, but unprecedented times also presents unprecedented opportunities. Opportunities to do things differently, opportunities to listen differently, opportunities to determine who you will listen to. And over the course of our work, and certainly my work here at RBC as I lead social impact and innovation, one of the greatest opportunities that I have had, certainly over the last 5 years, is that of listening to young Canadians coast to coast to coast, and really understanding their awareness and grasp of the biggest issues of the day, and communicating meaningful, implementable solutions to some of those big issues, whether it be issues around disability, access to mental health, climate and climate anxiety, racial and social justice, you know, on every pillar. Young people are offering up critical insights, which if we as, sort of that older generation and those of us who are leading organizations have, I think, the humility and presence of mind to listen to young people, we can actually begin to, preserve civil society and our environment, and address issues of social inequity as has been exacerbated by COVID-19. We can actually begin to mitigate those things for the benefit of future generations to come. And so, when I think of our work here at RBC, and specifically a program that I have the privilege of leading called RBC Future Launch, which is a $500 million 10-year investment to ensure that young people are prepared for the future of work. While I'm privileged to lead that work, I also recognize that I cannot think of that work in isolation. In part because, whether it is sort of climate, mental health, access to supports and services around disability and so on, these issues are all intersected. They're all interrelated. And which means that these conversations are that much more important, because what young people are helping us to do is to understand where we're not connecting the dots, or where we may have blind spots. And so the voice of youth is more critical than it ever has been, I think, at any point in human history. I think it will come down to our ability as leaders, intergenerational leaders or business leaders, community leaders, however we style ourselves as leaders, the humility to listen and to act, and let you lead where you have the capacity to do so.
Thank you, Mark. Minu, I know members of the disability and accessibility group were very excited to have someone from Canada's leading kids rehabilitation hospital here today. Can you tell us how you involve young people in the decisions made at Holland Bloorview, and anything you heard in the presentation today that you might want to incorporate in your work moving forward?
Thank you. Before I answer to your question, I just want to acknowledge and give thanks for being allowed to speak to all of you from the territory of Huron-Wendat and Petun First Nations, the Seneca, and most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit. It's really a privilege to be here and share with you the work we do at the Holland Bloorview Kids Rehab Hospital, where youth and kids are a huge part of every service we deliver, or even the design and research, as well as any of the clinical changes in services that we ever adhere to. So having said that, I am so impressed with the presentations today, because that validate what we have been seeing and hearing from our own youth advisory committee. Of course, that is made up of people, youth with disabilities, but you all validated that how all of your experiences are interconnected, whether it's asking for racial justice, whether it's asking for Indigenous rights, or be allowed to be recognized the human diversity that we all bring to the table, and asking for inclusion. I think this is what I really heard and clear, loud and clear from every presentation, the need to be inclusive, accepting that diversity, and also holding the older generation policymakers and the politicians accountable for the mess that has been created by creating silos, by not funding adequately the resources that are required to improve accessibility, or even climate change, right? Not putting some proactive policies in place so that will allow the employers, the funders, the government to make sure that they create inclusive and welcoming environments. And I think from Ella and Kate, one thing really stood out to me is their demand for inclusive language, not using ableist language. We know ableism is the most serious stereotype out there that hurt all people with disabilities, especially youth and kids, who are very precious. Even sometimes they could experience ableism from their own families, their own support system that should be supporting them and nurturing them. So that ableist language, when it exists in our policies, look at our Education Act, when they call special needs, education, all students are special. Why do you separate the students with disability under those words? Those are disempowering. So that really stood out to me, inclusive language, inclusive spaces, and also learning from youth with or without disabilities, but also learning with them what will make a barrier-free Canada for all of us. Because when the barriers are removed for any marginalized group, we know that society become more welcoming for everyone. And one thing from my own experience, I know that all of us will experience disability one time or another in our lifetime, either through our own experience with disability or through a family member or temporarily through a disease. So when our youth are asking for a accessible society, accessible Canada, accessible world, they're actually making it work for all of us. So I really appreciate being given an opportunity to hear the connectiveness, but also talking about from the race, from diversity, from justice and inclusive lens altogether connected to the voices of youth.
Thank you, Minu. My next question is for Megan. We're just a few days removed from the closing of the COP26 summit in Glasgow. I think a lot of young people are disappointed in the lack of commitment they saw there. Are they right to be concerned? And how can youth like myself ensure that our voices are heard in that global conversation?
How to answer that in 30 seconds.
Yeah.
Could have been bigger, for sure. Could have gotten more done, for sure. There were gains. There were gains. One of the recommendations, I wrote it down about how we have to protect and restore nature that holds vast amounts of carbon. It's like, oh, why weren't you two at Glasgow? Because we finally have worked so hard to actually get that in the document. Yay. Katie actually used to be an intern here at WWF. We should have just sent her. She could have been at the negotiating table. So this is the thing, that the agreements, what comes out of Glasgow isn't going to be the be all and the end all. We have to attack it from every single angle, like those individual actions, like those collective actions, like those government actions. So it could have been better, but let's take the positivity from the steps that were made, like trying to phase out coal. That's a huge win.
Thank you, Megan. My next question is for Minu. In recent years, we've seen decision makers doing a better job of engaging young people by establishing youth advisory groups or holding small consultations. But too often, those groups fail to include youth with disabilities or to speak to the issues of importance to them. Why is that important, and how can they do a better job of making sure everyone is included?
I think we know that there's no doubt that lived experiences matter, and lived experiences of youth with disabilities, if we apply the lens of inclusion, they should not be excluded. However, we know that that is not the case. So it is really important that we do put some criteria in place, even though I hate labels, I hate quotas and check boxes, but sometimes in order to create that equal playing field, you have to create those check boxes. But for youth with disabilities, even the most important, and that a point that really stand out, when you don't create accessible spaces, then just having your desire to include youth with disabilities is not sufficient if you have not considered full accessibility, whether it's at an event or whether it's a virtual space when you don't have sign language or you don't have transcripts. or you don't have other, the chat functions that are not including those with vision disabilities, that will automatically, systematically exclude youth with disabilities. So we have to be very cautious in making sure that the resources and funds are attached to provide those services. Talk is not enough. You have to put your resources and actions behind it. So you do not speak for those youth, you create a space for those youth so they can speak for themselves.
Thank you, Minu. We are running a bit short on time, but Mark, we've heard some very important recommendations in the presentations today, but many good ideas need funding and political support to actually lead change. So if you can answer quickly, how are you working to use your platform for young people and their ideas?
Thanks for that question, Sarah. One of the key areas of focus for RBC through RBC Future Launch is that of mental well-being, access to supports and services, in particular, and ensuring that we can increase access to supports and services for young people. Based on the mental health statement that came out of this session, it validates something that we've always known, and that is that young people who need access to sort of clinical and therapeutic services struggle to access those services in large part because they are provisioned only through private insurance. In other words, if you don't have an insurance carrier, you struggle to get the actual support that you do need. And what we're trying to do is to increase access to those supports and services to reduce the number of young people who actually do not have access to clinical support, how and when they need it. And of course, working with, for example, the government of Ontario to increase, the wellness hubs across the province, and really then working federally with the Minister of Health to replicate that model right across the country, so that we can actually better increase and provision wellness and support for young people that is culturally relevant, that is accessible, and then really takes the individual needs of young people into consideration.
Thank you, Mark. Adet, you spoke earlier about tokenism, and we've seen a lot of change over the last couple of years with regard to how we talk about racism in this country. I mean, last summer we saw the Prime Minister take a knee at a Black Lives Matter protest, and this year many Canadians joined in wearing orange shirts on the first ever National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. Lots of people are saying the right things, and yet the structural conditions of racism persist. So how can young people shift the conversation from personal responsibility to collective action?
This is a really good question. So having decision makers and having folks who are in positions of power actually say, as you said, the right things is an entry point. So how to move it away from tokenism is actually is to hold those people accountable for what they've said. So already by making affirmations, by making public statements, it's an entry point for young people to be able to underscore when coming back. So essentially, I heard you say this. This is something that's important to you. This is something that's important to the government, or there's something that's important to your organization. Let's follow up on that. How can we follow up on that? And how can we see action? So, it can, I know, and I can hear, and I can appreciate that sometimes it can be frustrating. It can feel like tokenism. It can feel like something that's performative, but in fact, it can be quite strategic for young people to actually use that as an entry point. So that's one, I guess, reflection I would have, because that's already better than not having that out in the public discourse. Now, the challenge, of course, is that discourse can become then something that is empty if there is no action that actually is followed. And so And that's really, really key. And that's where folks like, like myself, considering myself as an adult ally, and others can really hold each other accountable. So I think there's something there in what we have to do and the role that we have to play. I think we can certainly take inspiration from some young people that we have heard that speak out publicly. Greta Thunberg is a great example, but there are so many young people who are sort of saying, this is just talk. We need to see more action. And how can we build on that action? So I think that can be quite inspiring for young people, and good examples of how that hold decision makers accountable. And then lastly, I would say we are seeing more representation. And so, that's good. That's encouraging. It's not enough. It's not where we want to be, but we are seeing it. And the question really is about how do we ensure that we go beyond just representation? So just beyond sort of diversifying the voices. So having young people at the table. So having, how do we go beyond that representation and then that ticking of the box, and actually making sure that young people are given the conditions in those spaces to really express themselves. So one can talk about a safe space, but simply put, it's what are the conditions that we need to put in place so that young people can express what they want, what they need, can advocate, and not feel that afterwards they're going to be shut down, that they're not necessarily going to be heard or challenged in being able to do that. And so that's a responsibility we hold, absolutely, as decision makers, absolutely as adult allies, of really working hard on making those spaces truly, truly inclusive, and really being conscious of the power dynamics that are at play in those spaces. And it means really stepping back, really actively listening, and then being prepared again to be challenged. And so that's something that we're thinking about a lot at Equitas. That's something that we try to do in the work that we do with young people and with young people's groups. But it continues to be a challenge. And so I would say to young people to really identify what you need to make those spaces where you can really speak up and out. What are the conditions that are necessary for you?
Thank you, Adet. It feels like this conversation is just getting started, but unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you all so much to all our panelists for chatting with us today. It is important for us young people to know that adult allies are here to amplify us and to help us create a better world. Now I'd like to pass the virtual mic to Ali Truesdell, UNICEF Canada's Youth Participation Lead, for an exciting announcement.
I just quickly wanted to say huge congrats to this year's Youth Advocacy Program participants. You did such an amazing job in a really, really busy lives that you lead. So we're super grateful for all of you. And just wanted to share that we have opened applications for next year's Youth Advocacy Program. We've shared the links in the chat, so go check them out. We encourage young people to apply and adult allies to share it with young people that you know. Thank you.
Thank you, Ali. As we come to a close today, we encourage you to keep the conversation going. You can read and share the Reimagine playbook widely to amplify youth voices and experience and help reimagine a better future for young people in Canada and around the world. The links will be shared in the chat. As you all know, tomorrow is officially National Child Day and World Children's Day. UNICEF is calling on everyone to go blue to say thank you to children and youth who have sacrificed so much during the pandemic and taken action to keep all of us safer. You can find out how you, your friends and families, and your organizations can go blue by visiting unicef.ca/National Child Day. I want to take a minute to thank our National Child Day partners, BGC Canada, Equitas, International Institute for Child Rights and Development, the Students' Commission of Canada, and YMCA Canada. We'd also like to thank Simultaneous Interpretation, Pro Bono ASL, and our longtime partner, Overlap Associates, for your support today. I'd also like to acknowledge some of the adults who have joined us today to hear from these young people. We are joined today by a number of leaders and decision makers who will support young people to create change. Special thanks to all the young people involved today. And thank you all for joining us. I'm Sarah Chaudhry, and it has been an absolute pleasure to be your MC today. Take care, everyone.
I've asked a lot of children and youth over the pandemic.
We've disrupted their schools, their family and social networks, and even their play.
Every child has the right to a childhood. November 20th is National Child Day, and we're asking you to go blue.
To say thank you to young people for all they've sacrificed to keep all of us safer.
To celebrate their rights and to show them that we're going to help them create the future they imagine.
We are going blue to say thank you. Join us.
Join us.